The coffee mug shattered against the concrete floor, sending steaming liquid across Cassidy Wainwright's worn combat boots. Major Thaddeus Grimm's 6'4" frame blocked the mess hall exit, his predatory grin visible to 200-plus elite rangers who had stopped eating to watch the show. "Clean up on aisle, princess!" Grimm's voice boomed with cruel authority as he kicked the ceramic shards toward her feet. "That's what happens when Disney characters try to serve real warriors." His meaty fist grabbed her neon blue ponytail, yanking her head back to expose the defined cheekbones hidden beneath her custodial uniform. "Look at this, boys. Someone's little sister got lost on her way to Comic-Con." The mess hall erupted in savage entertainment. Phones appeared instantly, live streaming the humiliation to thousands. Comments flooded in. "Military going woke? Barbie on base. Where's her unicorn?" The notification pings created a symphony of digital mockery that echoed off the concrete walls like bullets ricocheting in a shooting gallery. But Master Chief Garrison Fletcher, watching from the corner booth where he nursed black coffee and 27 years of hard-earned wisdom, felt ice form in his stomach. Those weren't civilian hands gripping that mop handle. The callus pattern between thumb and index finger was specific, unmistakable. Sniper's grip, the kind that developed after thousands of hours behind precision rifles, where trigger control meant the difference between mission success and body bags coming home draped in flags. The way she absorbed the hair pulling without losing balance, combat conditioning, the micro movements of her eyes cataloging exits and threats while appearing submissive, tactical awareness that took years of life or death situations to develop. "Time for some real military education, sweetheart," Grimm sneered, reaching for his phone to record her next humiliation. The live stream counter climbed past 5,000 viewers, each one hungry for authentic military content that would go viral within hours. In exactly 18 minutes, when 12 Rangers would face 80-plus Taliban fighters in an Afghan death trap, everyone would learn that the princess they tormented was the most lethal guardian angel in military history. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows that made the mess hall feel more like an interrogation room than a dining facility. Fort Blackhawk's morning shift had turned into an impromptu arena where predators circled their prey with smartphones and cruel laughter. Base security's a complete joke if they're letting cosplayers wander around with actual access badges, Colonel Beaumont Sterling muttered from the officers' section, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. His voice carried the kind of entitled authority that came from 3 decades of desk assignments and political maneuvering. Someone needs to audit whoever approved this obvious security breach. Cassidy kept her eyes down, continuing to push the industrial mop across concrete that had seen more combat boots than a parade ground. Her custodial uniform hung loose, deliberately shapeless, hiding the athletic build that spoke of endless hours in training facilities most people didn't know existed. The neon blue hair was a masterstroke of misdirection, so attention-grabbing that nobody looked past it to notice the way she moved with economical precision, never wasting motion, always maintaining perfect balance. "Hey, princess," Private Sterling Hawthorne called out from a nearby table, his phone camera focused on her face. "Smile for the internet. You're about to be famous for all the wrong reasons." His TikTok account had been struggling for engagement, but this authentic military content was already generating hundreds of shares per minute. The social media feeds exploded with commentary. #princess. On Base began trending as viewers shared theories about how a civilian with blue hair had gained access to one of America's most secure military installations. The narrative wrote itself: incompetent security, military standards declining, woke policies destroying warrior culture. But Garrison Fletcher wasn't watching the phones or reading the comments. He was studying the woman they were tormenting, and every instinct honed by 3 decades of special operations was screaming warnings that nobody else seemed to hear. When Grimm grabbed her shoulder to spin her around for a better camera angle, Fletcher saw it. A micro-flinch that wasn't fear or surprise. It was tactical assessment. Her body had automatically calculated the exact force needed to break his grip, disable him, and clear a path to the nearest exit. She had run those calculations in milliseconds, then chosen not to act. That level of restraint required training, the kind of training that turned ordinary soldiers into weapons so precise they could kill with a rolled-up magazine or save lives with the same hands that had ended hundreds of others. "Ma'am," Fletcher said quietly, rising from his booth with the deliberate movements of someone whose body had absorbed decades of combat damage. "You might want to check the supply closet. Someone reported equipment irregularities that need immediate attention." Grimm spun toward the interruption, his face flushing with anger at having his entertainment disrupted. "Stand down, Master Chief. This doesn't concern you." The territorial aggression in his voice marked him as exactly the kind of officer who confused rank with respect, authority with leadership. "Everything on this base concerns me, Major," Fletcher replied, with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his position through competence rather than connections. "Especially when it involves potential security matters that might compromise operational readiness." The tension stretched between them like a tripwire, two military philosophies facing off. The old-school operator who measured worth through capability versus the new generation politician who valued appearance over substance. Cassidy used the momentary distraction to step back toward the service corridor, her movements so smooth they barely registered as intentional. She had learned long ago that the best way to disappear was to become forgettable, and angry men focused on each other rarely noticed departing women. "Equipment irregularities?" Colonel Sterling's voice cut through the brewing confrontation like a blade through silk. His political instincts sensed an opportunity to demonstrate his security consciousness. "What kind of irregularities, Master Chief?" Fletcher's eyes met Cassidy's for just a moment. In that brief contact, something passed between them. Recognition, not of identity, but of type. Warrior acknowledging warrior, even when one was hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed camouflage. The kind that require immediate investigation by qualified personnel, Fletcher said, never breaking eye contact with the woman who was already fading into the background like smoke dissipating in wind. "Sir," 2,300 miles away, in a valley that didn't appear on most maps, 12 American Rangers were conducting final equipment checks for a mission that intelligence had classified as routine. Captain Remington Wainwright, 28 years old and carrying the confidence of someone who had never failed at anything that mattered, reviewed the operational brief one last time. "Standard capture-kill mission," he told his team, his voice carrying across the pre-dawn darkness like a prayer whispered in a cathedral. "Taliban mid-level commander reportedly holed up in a compound outside Kandahar. Intelligence suggests minimal resistance, local militia at most." Staff Sergeant Dakota Steele, the team's most experienced operator, felt the familiar nod of unease that always preceded operations that seemed too easy. 15 years in special operations had taught him that the missions intelligence labeled routine were often the ones that sent soldiers home in aluminum boxes. "Sir, the timeline feels rushed," he said carefully, knowing that questioning orders was a delicate balance between tactical prudence and insubordination. "Usually we have weeks to prepare for target acquisition. This came down from CENTCOM less than 48 hours ago." Remington nodded, acknowledging the concern without dismissing it. Leadership meant listening to experienced voices while maintaining command authority. "I understand your reservations, Sergeant, but the intelligence window is narrow. If we don't move now, the target disappears into the mountains for another 6 months." What none of them knew was that 3,000 miles away, in a basement facility that officially didn't exist, a woman with neon blue hair was monitoring their communications while scrubbing floors. Her janitorial duties provided perfect cover for accessing base systems that most colonels couldn't reach. Every frequency, every encrypted channel, every classified briefing was being filtered through algorithms that could detect patterns invisible to human analysis. The Taliban weren't planning to disappear into the mountains. They were planning to turn a routine capture mission into a massacre that would demonstrate the cost of American involvement in Afghanistan. 84 fighters with heavy weapons, mortar support, and detailed intelligence about American tactics were waiting in prepared positions that would transform a simple compound raid into a killing field. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that 12 Rangers operating alone would die alone, with no Guardian watching from impossible distances. Back at Fort Blackhawk, the mess hall drama continued to unfold with the relentless momentum of a train approaching a collapsed bridge. Grimm had returned his attention to humiliating the janitor, but she had vanished into the service corridors like a ghost fading at sunrise. "Where'd our princess go?" he demanded, scanning the dining facility with the frustrated anger of a predator who had lost sight of wounded prey. "Can't have unauthorized personnel wandering around unsupervised. That's a security violation. Someone's about to pay for this disrespect, like if you sense this janitor is hiding something dangerous." Colonel Sterling seized the opportunity to demonstrate his security consciousness. Major Grimm, initiate a base-wide search. I want that individual located and properly processed through security protocols. If there's been a breach in our clearance procedures, we need to identify and correct it immediately. The announcement echoed through Fort Blackhawk's communication systems like a hunter's horn calling the pack to chase. Military police began systematic searches of every building, every closet, every possible hiding place where an unauthorized civilian might seek refuge. They found cleaning supplies in designated locations, maintenance equipment properly secured and cataloged, service tunnels empty except for the usual infrastructure that kept a major military installation functioning. They did not find a woman with blue hair because they were looking for a civilian where they should have been searching for a ghost. Lieutenant Phoenix Crawford, the base's signals intelligence specialist, was the first to notice the anomalies. Deep in the communications center, where classified transmissions flowed like digital blood through the arteries of American military power, her monitoring equipment detected patterns that shouldn't exist. "Ma'am," she called to her supervisor, Major Raven Fitzgerald, who was reviewing overnight intelligence reports with the methodical precision of someone who understood that overlooked details could cost lives. "We're showing unauthorized access to encrypted channels. Someone's been monitoring classified communications for the past 6 hours." Major Fitzgerald moved to Crawford's workstation with the swift urgency of a medical professional responding to a cardiac alarm. The screens displayed data flows that painted a picture of systematic intelligence gathering far beyond civilian capability. "What kind of access?" Fitzgerald asked, her voice tight with the implications of what she was seeing. Unauthorized monitoring of military communications was the kind of security breach that ended careers and triggered investigations that could last years. "Everything," Crawford replied, her fingers flying across keyboards as she traced digital footprints through layers of encryption that were supposed to be impenetrable. CENTCOM briefings, operational orders, even the Afghanistan mission parameters that came through this morning. The blood drained from Fitzgerald's face as she grasped the scope of the penetration. Someone with sophisticated technical knowledge had been systematically accessing America's most sensitive military intelligence while operating from inside one of their most secure facilities. "Lock down all external communications immediately," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had suddenly found herself at the center of a potential national security crisis. "No data leaves this base until we identify the source of the breach." But the lockdown came too late. The intelligence had already been transmitted through channels that didn't appear in any official directory, using equipment that existed in the shadows between acknowledged and classified. In Afghanistan, Captain Remington Wainwright's team was loading into vehicles for the drive to their target area, unaware that their mission parameters had been compromised, and their enemy was waiting with detailed knowledge of American tactics and timing. In Fort Blackhawk's service tunnels, a woman with blue hair was changing into equipment that transformed her from custodial worker into something else entirely. The transformation was surgical in its precision, every piece of gear selected for maximum capability while maintaining minimal signature. Garrison Fletcher found the evidence 27 minutes after the search began. Hidden behind a false panel in a maintenance closet that most people walked past without noticing, he discovered equipment that made his Special Forces background feel like basic training. Advanced night vision systems worth more than most soldiers made in a year. Communications gear that could penetrate electronic warfare environments and maintain contact across continents. Weapons that existed in the catalogs of defense contractors but had never been approved for general military use. And documentation that carried classification markings he had seen only twice in his 27-year career, both times involving operations that officially had never happened, conducted by personnel who technically didn't exist. The first page made him sit down heavily on a supply crate, his legs suddenly unsteady as the implications crashed over him like a rogue wave hitting an unsuspecting shore. Operation Deathwatch, Classification. Classification, Cosmic Special Access Required Personnel. Cassidy, Ghost. Wainwright, Rank, Major, Force, Reconnaissance, Specialty, Precision, Elimination, Deep Penetration, Reconnaissance, Status, Deep Cover, Non-Official Cover. The photograph clipped to the folder showed the same woman who had been mopping floors and enduring humiliation in the mess hall, but the image told a different story. No blue hair, no custodial uniform. Instead, she wore the kind of tactical gear that suggested capabilities far beyond standard military training. The service record was heavily redacted, with black bars covering most operational details. But what remained visible painted a picture of someone who operated in the spaces between nations, conducting missions that required complete deniability and absolute precision. 384 confirmed eliminations, 0 failed missions. Current assignment: deep penetration reconnaissance to identify and neutralize Taliban intelligence networks operating within U.S. military installations. Fletcher's hands trembled slightly as he read further. The woman they had been humiliating, the princess they had mocked and recorded for social media entertainment, was quite possibly the most dangerous individual on the entire base. His radio crackled to life with Colonel Sterling's voice, tight with bureaucratic frustration. Master Chief Fletcher, report to my office immediately. We need to discuss your interaction with the security breach subject. Fletcher looked at the classified documents in his hands, then at the sophisticated equipment that represented capabilities he was only beginning to understand. Protocol demanded that he report the discovery immediately through proper channels, but 3 decades of special operations had taught him that sometimes protocol was the enemy of mission success, and something about this situation felt like a mission that was still in progress. "Copy that, sir," he responded into the radio, while carefully closing the folder and securing the compartment exactly as he had found it. "En route to your office." But first, he needed to understand what kind of game was actually being played on his base. The communication center buzzed with controlled panic as Lieutenant Crawford tracked digital ghosts through systems that were supposed to be unhackable. Her screens showed a complex pattern of data access that spoke to someone with training far beyond civilian hacking capabilities. "The intrusion started 6 months ago," she reported to Major Fitzgerald, her voice tight with the implications of what she was discovering. "But it's not random data theft. Someone's been specifically monitoring anything related to Taliban intelligence networks and counter-infiltration operations." Major Fitzgerald studied the access logs with growing unease. The pattern suggested someone conducting systematic intelligence gathering with specific operational objectives. Any indication of data exfiltration? Are they stealing information or just monitoring? That's the strange part, ma'am. No outbound data transfers that I can detect. It's like they're watching and waiting for something specific. Before Fitzgerald could respond, her secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated a call from outside normal command channels. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that meant nothing to most military personnel, but sent a chill down her spine. She answered on the second ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Major Fitzgerald, Fort Blackhawk Communications." "Major, this is Colonel Sarah Blackstone, Pentagon Special Activities Division. I need you to cease all investigation into your current security anomalies and report directly to me. This is a matter of national security that supersedes local command authority." The line went dead before Fitzgerald could respond, leaving her staring at the phone while her world suddenly shifted around, assumptions she had thought were solid. Pentagon Special Activities Division was a name whispered in corridors where careers were made and destroyed. They handled operations that existed in the gray areas between law and necessity, where plausible deniability was more important than public accountability. If they were involved, then the woman with blue hair wasn't a security breach. She was something far more complex and dangerous. In Afghanistan, the sun climbed toward its zenith as Captain Remington Wainwright's convoy approached the target area. The landscape stretched before them like a photograph from another planet. Ancient mountains carved by wind and time, valleys where empires had bled and died, sky so blue it seemed artificial. "2 clicks to the target," Sergeant Steele called from the lead vehicle, his voice carrying across the tactical radio network that connected 12 soldiers who trusted each other with their lives. Compound visual on the ridgeline ahead. Through his binoculars, Remington studied the target building. Intelligence had described a simple mud brick structure, housing a mid-level Taliban commander and perhaps a handful of local fighters. What he saw matched the briefing perfectly, too perfectly for someone who had learned to distrust easy answers. "Something feels wrong," he murmured into his headset, sharing his unease with the team that had learned to trust his instincts. "The compound looks abandoned. No movement, no security, no indicators of recent habitation. Could be they received advance warning," suggested Corporal Hunter Blake, the team's youngest member, but already showing the tactical awareness that separated survivors from casualties. Maybe they evacuated before we arrived. Or maybe they're waiting for us to get close enough that running becomes impossible, Steele added grimly. His 15 years of combat experience had shown him too many operations where the enemy demonstrated tactical patience that American forces consistently underestimated. Remington weighed the options with the careful calculation of someone who understood that leadership meant making decisions with incomplete information while accepting responsibility for the consequences. Continue the mission based on intelligence that might be compromised, or abort based on instincts that might be wrong. We proceed as planned, he decided, his voice carrying the authority that came from taking responsibility rather than avoiding it. But we assume hostile contact and prepare accordingly. Standard breaching procedures, maximum alertness. What they couldn't see, hidden in positions that had been prepared for weeks specifically to exploit American tactical doctrine. 84 Taliban fighters waited, with the patience of hunters who knew their prey was walking into a carefully constructed killing field. The compound wasn't the target, it was the bait. Back at Fort Blackhawk, Colonel Sterling's office had become the command center for a security investigation that was growing more complex by the hour. The walls displayed maps, photographs, and organizational charts that represented the kind of bureaucratic approach to problem solving that often created more problems than it solved. Master Chief Fletcher, Sterling said as Garrison entered the office with the measured pace of someone who had learned to project calm regardless of internal turbulence. I need you to explain your interaction with our security breach subject. Your intervention seemed to suggest prior knowledge of the individual. Fletcher had spent the walk to Sterling's office deciding how much truth he could reveal without compromising what he was beginning to suspect was a highly classified operation. Military careers were built on knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Sir, I observed tactical indicators that suggested the individual might have military background, he said carefully, choosing words that conveyed information without revealing sources. I thought it prudent to suggest she attend to duties that would remove her from a potentially volatile situation. Sterling's eyes narrowed with the suspicious calculation of someone who had learned to detect evasion through years of political maneuvering. What kind of tactical indicators, Master Chief? Movement patterns, situational awareness, physical conditioning that seemed inconsistent with civilian employment, Fletcher replied, maintaining the neutral tone that experienced NCOs used when navigating between truth and disclosure. Nothing definitive, but enough to warrant caution. Before Sterling could probe further, his secure phone rang with the authoritative tone that indicated a call from higher headquarters. He answered with the crisp efficiency of someone who understood that colonels answered phones when generals called. Colonel Sterling, Fort Blackhawk. The voice on the other end carried the kind of authority that made full colonels snap to attention, even through electronic communication. Colonel, this is General Marcus Thorne, Pentagon. I need you to immediately cease all security investigations related to custodial personnel and report directly to me. This is a matter that requires special handling. Sterling's face went through a complex series of expressions as he grasped the implications of receiving direct orders from Pentagon General Staff. Operations that bypassed normal command channels typically involved activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Sir, we have potential security breaches that require... Colonel, General Thorne interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of someone who didn't repeat orders. You have your instructions. Implement them immediately. The line went dead, leaving Sterling staring at the phone while his carefully constructed investigation crumbled around the reality of forces beyond his control or understanding. Fletcher watched the colonel's face cycle through confusion, frustration, and reluctant acceptance. Military hierarchies were designed to function through clear chains of command, but sometimes those chains led to destinations that couldn't be discussed in normal venues. Master Chief, Sterling said finally, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who had suddenly discovered his authority had limits he hadn't known existed. Apparently our security investigation is being handled through other channels. Return to your normal duties. Fletcher saluted and left the office, but instead of returning to normal duties, he made his way back to the maintenance area where he had discovered equipment that suggested capabilities far beyond standard military operations. The compartment was empty. Every piece of gear, every classified document, every indicator that Cassidy Ghost Wainwright was anything other than a custodial worker had vanished as thoroughly as if it had never existed. But on the concrete floor, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a small mark in chalk. Three parallel lines that meant absolutely nothing to most people, but carried specific meaning for those who operated in the shadows, between acknowledged and classified. Message received, mission continues, maintain cover. Garrison Fletcher stared at the mark for several seconds, then carefully erased it with his boot. 30 years of special operations had taught him that some knowledge carried responsibilities that extended far beyond normal military service. Somewhere on this base, a woman with blue hair was preparing for something that would either save American lives or cost them. His job was to ensure she had the space to succeed, even if he never learned the full scope of what success meant. In Afghanistan, the trap was beginning to close with the inexorable momentum of a landslide starting on a mountainside. Captain Remington Wainwright's convoy had reached the objective area and was conducting final approach procedures that followed American tactical doctrine with textbook precision, which was exactly what the Taliban commanders had planned for. "Dismount in 30 seconds, Remington ordered over the radio network that connected his team across a tactical formation designed to maximize firepower while minimizing vulnerability to ambush. Standard breaching protocol. Watch for tripwires, improvised explosives, and secondary positions." The vehicles came to a coordinated stop in positions that provided overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. 12 Rangers exited with the fluid precision of a unit that had trained together until individual movement became collective choreography. They advanced toward the target compound with the careful discipline of soldiers who understood that the most dangerous moment in any operation was the transition from mobility to assault. Their weapons tracked potential threat areas while their communications maintained constant contact with higher headquarters. Everything proceeded exactly according to standard operating procedures. Every movement followed doctrine that had been refined through decades of combat experience and tactical evolution, which made them perfectly predictable to an enemy who had studied those procedures and prepared accordingly. The first mortar round landed 50 meters behind the assault team, close enough to announce hostile intent but far enough away to avoid immediate casualties. It was followed by machine gun fire from concealed positions that had been carefully sited to create a killing field with no effective cover. "Contact!" Steele's voice cut across the radio network with the controlled urgency of someone who had suddenly found himself in the kind of situation where training either saved lives or counted bodies. Multiple hostiles, prepared positions, heavy weapons. Remington's tactical assessment was immediate and grim. They were caught in an open area with minimal cover, facing an enemy force that significantly outnumbered them and held superior positions. Standard doctrine called for immediate withdrawal to defensible terrain, but withdrawal required movement across ground that was already being covered by enemy fire. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site with the professional competence of fighters who understood that American tactical superiority depended on mobility and firepower support. "All elements bound backwards to Rally Point Alpha," Remington ordered, using hand signals to coordinate movement that needed to be simultaneous and precise. "Covering fire on my mark." The Rangers began the tactical withdrawal that could mean the difference between mission failure and total disaster. But as they moved, additional Taliban positions revealed themselves with the calculated timing of predators who had waited for prey to commit to disadvantageous terrain. What had begun as a 12-man capture mission was rapidly becoming a survival situation where outcome depended on capabilities that weren't taught in standard training programs. 2,000 miles away, in a location that didn't appear on any Fort Blackhawk facility map, Cassidy "Ghost" Wainwright was making final preparations for the most important shot of her career. The custodial uniform had been replaced by equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology and decades of hard-earned operational experience. Her communications gear was locked onto frequencies that connected her directly to the Rangers who were fighting for their lives in Afghanistan. She could hear the controlled panic in their voices as they called for air support that was too far away and medical evacuation that couldn't reach them through hostile fire. But she could also see what they couldn't see from their ground-level perspective. Satellite imagery fed directly to her tactical display showed Taliban positions that had been prepared with professional military precision. This wasn't a hasty ambush by local fighters. This was a coordinated operation designed to eliminate American Special Operations personnel. Her mission parameters were clear and absolute. Maintain cover at all costs. Allow no action that could compromise the deep penetration reconnaissance that was her primary objective. The Taliban network she was investigating was more important than any single tactical engagement, but the voice she heard calling for covering fire belonged to her brother. Protocol demanded that she maintain position and continue her intelligence-gathering mission. The lives of 12 Rangers, while tragic, were less important than identifying Taliban infiltration networks that threatened thousands of American personnel across multiple theaters. But Cassidy Wainwright had not spent 8 years becoming the most lethal sniper in American military history just to listen to her brother die while she counted Taliban radio transmissions. She began assembling her rifle with movements so practiced they had become mechanical reflex, each component locked into place with the precision of a Swiss watch, creating a weapon system capable of accuracy that defied conventional understanding of ballistic limitations. The scope was a masterpiece of military technology that could distinguish heat signatures across distances where most people couldn't see buildings. The ammunition was handcrafted to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, each round representing hours of precise manufacturing. But the most important component was the finger that would pull the trigger. Cassidy had fired that rifle under conditions that ranged from Arctic cold to desert heat, from urban combat to mountain warfare. She had made shots that other snipers declared impossible and eliminated targets that conventional forces couldn't reach. Now she was about to violate direct orders and compromise a classified mission to save 12 soldiers who had no idea their guardian angel was 2,000 miles away. The first shot would travel across continents through satellite relay systems that existed in the classified realm between acknowledged and impossible. The Taliban fighter who thought he was safely hidden behind a wall in Afghanistan would simply cease to exist, killed by a bullet fired from a basement in Georgia. But that first shot would also signal the beginning of the end for Cassidy Ghost Wainwright's career as an invisible operator. Once she revealed herself, there would be no returning to the shadows. She settled behind her rifle and began the breathing pattern that slowed her heart rate and steadied her hands for the kind of precision that could only be achieved when body and weapon became a single instrument of lethal purpose. In Afghanistan, the Taliban were about to learn that some angels were armed with more than prayers. At Fort Black Hawk, the morning shift continued with routine efficiency that masked the extraordinary events unfolding in the hidden spaces beneath standard military operations. Soldiers attended briefings, conducted training, performed maintenance, and processed paperwork with the methodical precision that kept America's military machine functioning across global operations. None of them knew that their base had become the command center for an operation that would either save 12 American lives or trigger an investigation that could reshape special operations doctrine. Major Thaddeus Grimm had returned to his office after the morning's entertainment, already reviewing the social media metrics that showed his harassment of the blue-haired janitor generating thousands of views and hundreds of comments. The live stream had been shared across military social media networks, creating exactly the kind of viral content that built personal brands and advanced careers through digital popularity. His phone buzzed with notifications from followers who appreciated authentic military content that showed the real culture of America's fighting forces. Comments praised his no-nonsense approach to maintaining standards and expressed support for keeping the military focused on mission rather than political correctness. But buried among the supportive messages were a few comments that made him pause. Anonymous accounts asking questions about security protocols, users with military profile pictures suggesting that the blue-haired woman might not be what she appeared, professional soldiers wondering how a civilian had gained access to restricted areas. Grimm dismissed the concerns as the paranoid speculation of keyboard warriors who watched too many action movies. He had personally witnessed the woman's complete passivity under pressure. No training, no resistance, no indication of capability beyond basic janitorial functions. But as he scrolled through the comments, one message made him stop completely. It came from an account with no profile picture and a username that was just a series of numbers. The message itself was simple, but somehow carried weight that made his hands tremble. Major Grimm, you have no idea what you just did. Pray that you never find out. The ghosts are watching. Before he could respond or investigate the account further, his computer screen went black. Not powered down, not crashed, simply black, as if someone had reached through the internet and switched off the display. When the screen flickered back to life 30 seconds later, the message had vanished. No record in his browser history, no indication that the conversation had ever occurred. But the memory remained, along with an unease that felt like walking alone through a cemetery at midnight. Military-grade cybersecurity protocols she accessed now protect executive business environments with classified-level digital protection standards. The afternoon shift change brought new personnel to Fort Blackhawk's operations centers, but the rhythm of base activities continued without interruption. Evening briefings were conducted, security reports were filed, and duty rosters were updated according to the standard procedures that had been refined through decades of institutional experience. But beneath that surface normalcy, patterns were emerging that suggested forces operating according to different rules and priorities than those found in official military manuals. Lieutenant Crawford's monitoring equipment detected communication bursts that lasted microseconds and transmitted data through frequencies that shouldn't have been accessible to equipment on base. Major Fitzgerald received phone calls from Pentagon offices that officially didn't exist. Colonel Sterling discovered that his security investigation had been transferred to authorities he couldn't contact through normal channels. Each anomaly by itself might have been explained as administrative error or equipment malfunction. Together, they painted a picture of an operation that existed in the spaces between acknowledged and classified, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in official reports. And in Afghanistan, where 12 Rangers were about to discover that distance was no protection against enemies with patience and planning, someone was preparing to demonstrate that America's most dangerous weapons were often the ones that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The scope reticle settled on a target 2,000 miles away, guided by technology that bridged continents through mathematical precision that approached the miraculous. Cassidy's breathing slowed to the rhythm that synchronized heartbeat with trigger pull, creating the kind of organic machinery that turned intent into result across impossible distances. Her finger began the steady pressure that would send a message across the world, written in the universal language of high-velocity projectiles and delivered with the kind of precision that redefined the possible. The first shot would save her brother's life. The last shot would end her career as a ghost. But ghosts who became visible had ways of becoming legends instead. The trigger broke with the inevitability of sunrise, and halfway around the world, a Taliban fighter who thought he was safely hidden behind stone walls simply stopped existing. Captain Remington Wainwright's radio crackled with incoming fire as his team fought for survival in terrain that had become a carefully constructed killing field. The Taliban positions were professionally sited, mutually supporting, and manned by fighters who demonstrated tactical competence that exceeded intelligence estimates. "We need air support now," Steele called over the tactical network, his voice carrying the controlled desperation of someone who understood that their current position was rapidly becoming untenable. Multiple machine gun positions, mortar fire, estimated 80 hostile personnel in prepared defensive positions. But air support was 40 minutes away, and 40 minutes was approximately 39 minutes longer than 12 Rangers could survive in their current tactical situation. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site with professional competence, creating a trap that neutralized American advantages in mobility and firepower support. Remington's tactical assessment was grim and getting worse. They were pinned down by fire from multiple directions, taking casualties that reduced their combat effectiveness with each passing minute. Standard doctrine called for immediate withdrawal to defensible terrain, but withdrawal required movement across ground that was being swept by overlapping machine gun fire. "All elements, we're going to bound back to Rally Point Bravo," he ordered, using hand and arm signals to coordinate movement that needed to be precise and simultaneous. Team Alpha provides covering fire, Team Bravo moves first. "Execute on my mark." But before he could give the signal to begin tactical withdrawal, something impossible happened. The machine gun position that had been pouring devastating fire onto their location simply went silent, not ceased firing, silent, as if the gunner had suddenly decided to take a coffee break in the middle of a firefight. "What the hell?" Corporal Blake muttered, risking a glance toward the position that should have been shredding their defensive perimeter. Through his rifle scope, he could see the weapon still mounted and ready, but no gunner. Before anyone could speculate about Taliban tactical errors, a second machine gun position went silent, then a third. Each cessation of fire coincided with the distant crack of a precision rifle being fired from a direction that shouldn't have contained any friendly forces. "Overwatch element, identify yourself," Remington called over the radio, using protocols designed to coordinate with supporting units. "Unknown sniper, this is Reaper 6. Please identify your position and unit designation." The response came through static and electronic interference, but the voice was clear enough to stop his heart completely. Reaper 6, this is Ghost 7. I have Overwatch. Keep your people down and let me work. The voice belonged to his sister. Cassidy Wainwright, who was supposed to be conducting classified reconnaissance at Fort Blackhawk, was somehow providing precision fire support from positions that defied geographical possibility. Her voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who was operating well within established capabilities, but the implications of her presence transformed their tactical situation from desperate to incomprehensible. Ghost 7, confirm your position, Remington called, his voice tight with the conflict between mission requirements and family concern. How are you providing fire support from your current assignment location? Reaper 6, explanations later. Right now, I count 6 more hostile positions that need immediate attention. Keep everyone below the ridgeline, and trust me to handle the long-distance work. The professional competence in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't amateur intervention or reckless family protection. This was the sound of someone operating sophisticated equipment with training that exceeded standard military programs. But the questions multiplied faster than answers. How was she tracking targets across thousands of miles? What kind of communication system allowed real-time coordination between Afghanistan and Georgia? What technology made precision fire possible across continental distances? The tactical situation didn't allow time for speculation. Another Taliban position erupted in the kind of precisely placed fire that indicated professional military training. Remington's team was caught in a coordinated ambush that had been planned for weeks, specifically to eliminate American Special Operations personnel. Ghost 7, we're taking effective fire from multiple directions, he reported, using the clipped efficiency of combat communications. Can you identify Taliban command element? Affirmative, Reaper 6. I count 3 command posts coordinating the ambush. Taking them out now. The next sequence of events would be discussed in classified briefings for years afterward, analyzed by tactical specialists who would struggle to explain how precision fire delivered from impossible distances could eliminate specific targets with surgical accuracy. 3 shots, fired in sequence with mathematical precision, eliminated the Taliban command structure and transformed a coordinated ambush into a collection of isolated fighting positions that lost tactical coherence within minutes. But the implications extended far beyond immediate tactical success. Cassidy's intervention meant exposure of capabilities that were supposed to remain classified. Every radio transmission was being monitored by intelligence services across the globe. Every demonstration of impossible accuracy was being recorded and analyzed by enemies who would adapt their tactics accordingly. She was trading her career as an invisible operator for her brother's life. And she was doing it with the calm professionalism of someone who had already calculated the cost and accepted it without reservation. Reaper 6, you have a clear withdrawal route to the south, her voice continued, still carrying the controlled competence of someone operating well within known capabilities. I'll continue Overwatch until you reach extraction coordinates. Remington signaled his team to begin tactical withdrawal, but his mind was processing implications that extended far beyond their immediate survival. His sister's presence meant that their mission had been compromised from the beginning. The Taliban had known they were coming, known their route, known their tactics, but they hadn't known about Ghost 7. The withdrawal proceeded with textbook precision, covered by fire that eliminated threats before they could develop. 12 Rangers extracted from a killing field that should have claimed all their lives, protected by Guardian Angel, whose existence challenged everything they understood about military capability and geographical limitation. But in saving their lives, Cassidy had revealed herself to enemies who would spend considerable resources learning how to counter abilities they hadn't known existed. The ghost had become visible, and visible ghosts attracted hunters. Back at Fort Blackhawk, the evening shift was beginning to notice communication anomalies that suggested activities far beyond normal base operations. Lieutenant Crawford's monitoring equipment detected data bursts that carried more information than should have been possible through standard military communication systems. "Ma'am," she called to Major Fitzgerald, who had been fielding phone calls from Pentagon offices that weren't supposed to contact field installations directly. "We're showing massive data transmission through channels I can't identify. Someone's coordinating real-time operations using our base infrastructure." Major Fitzgerald moved to Crawford's workstation with the swift urgency of someone who had suddenly realized that normal security protocols might be inadequate for whatever was actually happening on their installation. The displays showed communication patterns that painted a picture of coordination between multiple global locations. Data was flowing through Fort Blackhawk's systems to destinations that didn't appear in any official directory, using encryption that exceeded standard military classification levels. What kind of operations require this level of communication sophistication? Fitzgerald asked, though she suspected the answer would be classified beyond her security clearance. The kind that don't officially exist, Crawford replied, her voice tight with the implications of what she was seeing. Ma'am, I think our base is being used as a command center for something that we're not supposed to know about. Before Fitzgerald could respond, every monitoring system in the communications center went dark simultaneously, not powered down, not malfunctioned, simply dark, as if someone had reached through electronic space and switched off their equipment. When the systems came back online 60 seconds later, all record of the anomalous communications had vanished. No data logs, no transmission records, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But the memory remained, along with the understanding that they had witnessed something that operated according to rules different from those found in standard military manuals. Professional liability insurance for specialized contractors includes reputation management and legal defense for high-stakes security professionals. These mystery shots are building to something explosive. Comment your theory about the Guardian Angel's identity. The evening briefing in Colonel Sterling's office carried undertones of tension that hadn't been present during normal base operations. Security reports that should have contained routine administrative details instead described anomalies that suggested forces operating beyond standard command authority. "Sir," Major Fitzgerald reported, carefully choosing words that conveyed information without revealing classified sources. "We've detected communication patterns that exceed normal operational parameters. Someone has been using our infrastructure to coordinate activities that we can't officially monitor." Colonel Sterling studied the heavily redacted report with the expression of someone who was beginning to understand that his authority had limitations he hadn't known existed. Military command structures were designed to function through clear hierarchies, but sometimes those hierarchies led to destinations that couldn't be discussed in normal venues. "Major, are you telling me that our base is being used for operations that we're not authorized to know about?" "Sir, I'm telling you that we've detected activities that suggest capabilities far beyond standard military programs. The technical sophistication indicates resources that aren't available through normal channels." Before Sterling could probe further, his secure phone rang with the authoritative tone that indicated another call from higher headquarters. He answered with the crisp efficiency of someone who had learned that colonels answered phones when generals called, regardless of personal convenience. "Colonel Sterling, Fort Blackhawk." "Colonel, this is General Sarah Blackstone, Pentagon Special Activities Division. I need you to transfer all personnel involved in communications monitoring to temporary duty elsewhere, effective immediately. This is a matter of national security that requires special handling." Sterling felt the ground shift beneath assumptions he had thought were solid. Pentagon Special Activities Division handled operations that existed in gray areas between law and necessity, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in public reports. "Ma'am, with respect, my personnel are essential for maintaining base security and—" "Colonel," General Blackstone interrupted, her voice carrying the finality of someone who didn't negotiate orders. "You have your instructions. Implement them within the hour." The line went dead, leaving Sterling staring at the phone while his carefully maintained command authority dissolved around forces beyond his control or understanding. Major Fitzgerald watched the colonel's face cycle through confusion, frustration, and reluctant acceptance. Military careers were built on knowing when to follow orders, even when those orders made no apparent sense. "Major," Sterling said finally, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who had discovered that his base was being used for purposes he wasn't authorized to understand. "You heard the general. Transfer your people to temporary assignments. Apparently our communications monitoring is being handled through other channels." But as Fitzgerald prepared to implement orders that made no tactical sense, her secure communication device buzzed with an incoming message from a source that shouldn't have been able to contact field installations directly. The message was brief but clear. "Major Fitzgerald, your personnel have observed classified operations. Maintain absolute silence regarding all anomalous communications detected in the last 24 hours. This is a matter of national security. Acknowledgement required." The sender's identification was simply a series of numbers that meant nothing to most military personnel, but carried specific meaning for those who operated in the spaces between acknowledged and classified. Fitzgerald typed a single-word response: acknowledged. Then she deleted the entire conversation and began preparing transfer orders for personnel who had seen too much of something that officially hadn't happened. But across the base, in locations that didn't appear on facility maps, equipment was being secured and evidence was being eliminated with the systematic precision of people who understood that successful operations left no traces for historians to discover. The Ghost had completed her mission and was preparing to disappear again. But this time, disappearing might not be enough. The next 12 hours would transform Fort Blackhawk from a routine military installation into the epicenter of an investigation that reached the highest levels of American national security. But first, 12 Rangers needed to survive the night in Afghanistan, and their guardian angel needed to complete the most complex extraction mission in special operations history. Crisis leadership training incorporates special operations decision-making protocols for executives facing high-pressure strategic challenges. Captain Remington Wainwright's team had reached the extraction coordinates, but their tactical situation remained precarious. The Taliban ambush had been disrupted by precision fire from impossible distances, yet enemy forces continued to reposition for follow-up attacks that could overwhelm even the most professional defensive perimeter. Ghost 7, this is Reaper 6, Remington called, over the encrypted channel that connected him to his sister across thousands of miles of geography and decades of military protocol. We need immediate extraction. Enemy forces are regrouping for secondary assault. Cassidy's response carried the calm professionalism of someone operating at the absolute peak of technical capability while managing resources that existed beyond standard military doctrine. Reaper 6, extraction assets are en route. ETA 12 minutes. I'll maintain Overwatch until they arrive. But maintaining Overwatch meant continued exposure of capabilities that were supposed to remain classified. Every shot she fired was being monitored by intelligence services that would spend considerable resources understanding how precision fire could be delivered across continental distances. She had already crossed the line between deniable operations and acknowledged intervention. Now she was documenting evidence that would reshape special operations doctrine, while simultaneously ending her career as an invisible operator. The satellite imagery flowing through her tactical display showed Taliban reinforcements moving toward the extraction site, with the methodical precision of fighters who understood that American tactical doctrine relied heavily on air support and rapid extraction. They were attempting to delay the Rangers long enough for heavy weapons to arrive. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that American capabilities were limited by geographical proximity and standard military resources. Cassidy's next shot eliminated a Taliban commander who was coordinating the reinforcement movement from what he thought was a secure position behind a stone wall. The bullet traveled 2,000 miles in less than a second, guided by technology that transformed intent into result, with mathematical precision that approached the miraculous. Her second shot disabled communications equipment that would have allowed enemy forces to coordinate air defense against incoming extraction aircraft. The third shot eliminated a heavy machine gun position that could have engaged American helicopters during the most vulnerable phase of tactical extraction. Each shot saved American lives while simultaneously documenting capabilities that foreign intelligence services would study for years. Every demonstration of impossible accuracy provided enemies with information they could use to develop countermeasures against weapon systems they hadn't known existed. But as Cassidy continued to provide covering fire for her brother's extraction, she was also being hunted by forces that operated according to different rules than those found in standard military manuals. 3 floors above the maintenance area where she had established her firing position, a team of Pentagon Special Activities personnel was conducting a systematic search for equipment that officially didn't exist. They carried authorization that superseded normal command channels and operated under orders that came directly from the highest levels of American national security. Their mission was simple in concept, but complex in execution: locate and secure all evidence of Project Ghostwatch before it could be discovered by unauthorized personnel or foreign intelligence services. The operation had been planned for months as a contingency against exactly the kind of exposure that was currently unfolding across global communication networks. Master Chief Fletcher had stumbled into the periphery of an operation that existed in the spaces between acknowledged and classified, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in official reports. His discovery of classified equipment had triggered automated security protocols that brought Pentagon attention to activities at Fort Blackhawk. But Fletcher's military experience had taught him to recognize patterns that suggested larger operations in progress. The systematic removal of evidence, the transfer of personnel who had observed anomalies, the phone calls from Pentagon offices that officially didn't exist, all indicated forces operating beyond normal military command structures. He made a decision that would either end his career or save a woman who was conducting operations that might not be officially sanctioned. Instead of reporting to his quarters as ordered, he made his way through service corridors toward the area where he suspected Cassidy was operating. The corridors beneath Fort Blackhawk stretched for miles, connecting buildings through underground passages that most personnel never accessed. They had been designed during the Cold War to ensure base operations could continue even under nuclear attack, creating a hidden infrastructure that paralleled the visible military installation above. Fletcher navigated these passages using knowledge accumulated through 30 years of exploring every corner of installations where he had served. Military bases held secrets in the same way that old houses held memories, hidden behind walls that most people never thought to examine. He found her in a chamber that didn't appear on any facility blueprint, surrounded by equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology and connected to communication systems that bypassed normal military networks. She was operating a weapon system that could deliver precision fire across continents while monitoring satellite feeds that showed real-time tactical situations on multiple global fronts. The transformation was complete and staggering. The woman who had been mopping floors and enduring humiliation was now revealed as someone operating capabilities that exceeded anything in Fletcher's special operations background. "Ma'am," he said quietly, announcing his presence without startling someone who was currently engaged in combat operations across multiple time zones. "I think we need to talk." Cassidy didn't turn from her position behind the rifle scope, but her voice carried acknowledgement of his presence along with continued focus on the tactical situation that required her immediate attention. "Master Chief, you're supposed to be in your quarters. This area is classified beyond your security clearance." "Ma'am, with respect, I've been classified beyond my security clearance for most of my career," Fletcher replied, studying the equipment that painted a picture of capabilities he was only beginning to understand. "And right now, I think you need someone watching your back while you watch theirs." Before she could respond, her communication system crackled with an incoming transmission from Captain Remington's team. The voice carried the controlled urgency of someone reporting tactical developments that required immediate response. "Ghost 7, we have extraction assets on final approach, but enemy forces are attempting to engage with shoulder-fired missiles. Can you provide fire support against air defense positions?" Cassidy's response was immediate and professional. "Reaper 6, I have visual on 3 sus positions. Taking them out now." The next sequence of shots eliminated Taliban air defense capabilities that could have destroyed American extraction helicopters and killed the crews along with the Rangers they were attempting to rescue. Each shot was placed with surgical precision that saved multiple American lives, while documenting the existence of weapon systems that foreign intelligence services would spend years trying to understand. But even as she continued to provide covering fire, Cassidy was aware that her position was being systematically compromised by Pentagon security teams that were following electronic signatures and communication intercepts to her exact location. "Master Chief," she said without taking her eyes from the scope, "in approximately 4 minutes, this facility is going to be overrun by people who want to ask questions about operations that officially don't exist. I need you to make a choice about whether you want to be here when they arrive." Fletcher studied the woman, who was simultaneously saving American lives and ending her own career as an invisible operator. Military loyalty was built on understanding that some missions required personal sacrifice for larger purposes, but it also demanded that soldiers protect each other when possible. "Ma'am, I've spent 30 years learning when to follow orders and when to follow conscience," he replied. "Right now, conscience says I stay until you're finished." The extraction helicopters reached Captain Remington's position with mechanical precision that spoke to decades of tactical evolution and training. 12 Rangers who should have died in a carefully constructed Taliban ambush were lifted from hostile territory and transported to safety, protected by Guardian Angel, whose existence challenged conventional understanding of military capability. But their salvation came at a cost that extended far beyond individual careers or classified programs. The demonstration of impossible accuracy across continental distances would trigger intelligence investigations that could reshape special operations doctrine while simultaneously providing enemies with information they could use to develop countermeasures. Cassidy fired her final shot, eliminating a Taliban sniper who was attempting to engage the extraction helicopters during their most vulnerable phase of departure. Then she began the systematic shutdown of equipment that represented years of development and millions of dollars in classified technology. Reaper 6, this is Ghost 7. All friendlies extracted safely. Ending Overwatch. Ghost 7 out. Her brother's voice carried across the communication system one final time, tight with emotion that couldn't be expressed through official military channels. Ghost 7, Reaper 6, thank you. All of us, thank you. Then she turned to face Master Chief Fletcher and the approaching sound of boots in corridors that were about to become the center of a security investigation that would reach the highest levels of American government. The next reveal destroys everything. Hit notifications before this identity explosion changes the entire military base forever. The Pentagon Special Activities Team reached the classified chamber with the systematic precision of people who conducted operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. 6 individuals wearing equipment that didn't appear in standard military catalogs, carrying authorization that superseded normal command structures, operating under orders that came directly from the most classified levels of American national security. Their leader was Colonel Marcus Ironside, 30-year veteran of operations that existed in the gray areas between law and necessity. He had conducted missions on every continent where American interests required deniable intervention, and his face carried the kind of weathered competence that came from making decisions where failure meant consequences far beyond personal career damage. Major Wainwright, he said, addressing Cassidy with the formal courtesy that special operations personnel reserve for colleagues whose capabilities exceeded normal military classification. You've exceeded your operational parameters. We need to discuss immediate extraction and damage control. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension, with authority that made even Pentagon personnel snap to attention. General Sarah Blackstone entered the chamber with the measured pace of someone who commanded resources that didn't appear in official military budgets. Colonel Ironside, stand down. Major Wainwright, report your status. The next few minutes would determine whether Cassidy's intervention would be classified as heroic initiative or catastrophic security breach. Pentagon Special Activities operated in zones where success and failure were often indistinguishable, and individual operators could become either legends or cautionary tales based on political considerations that exceeded tactical military necessity. "Ma'am," Cassidy replied, maintaining the professional bearing that had carried her through 8 years of operations that officially hadn't happened. 12 American personnel extracted safely from hostile territory. Mission parameters exceeded due to family member involvement, but all operational security measures maintained within acceptable limits. General Blackstone studied the equipment that surrounded them, taking inventory of capabilities that represented decades of development and testing in conditions that most military personnel would never encounter. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence indicated that decisions were being made at levels far above normal military command. "Major, your actions today saved American lives while simultaneously exposing classified capabilities that took years to develop," she said finally. "The question now is whether those lives were worth the compromise of operations that protect thousands more." The mathematics of special operations, often reduced to equations that balanced individual survival against larger strategic considerations. Cassidy had saved her brother and his team, but she had also documented the existence of weapons systems that foreign intelligence services would spend considerable resources understanding and countering. "Ma'am, I understand the implications," Cassidy replied. "I'm prepared to accept full responsibility for operational decisions that exceeded authorized parameters." But Master Chief Fletcher had been listening to a conversation that revealed layers of military activity he hadn't known existed, and his conscience was demanding responses that transcended normal military protocol. "General," he said, using the respectful tone that experienced NCOs employed when addressing senior officers about matters that exceeded normal command relationships. With respect, Major Wainwright's actions today demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical flexibility that keeps American soldiers alive. If that's not worth protecting, then maybe we need to examine what we're actually fighting for. The silence that followed carried weight that extended beyond immediate military considerations. General Blackstone was measuring factors that included congressional oversight, international diplomatic implications, and intelligence considerations that could affect American operations for years. But she was also a soldier who understood that military effectiveness ultimately depended on the willingness of individual operators to exceed official parameters when American lives were at stake. "Master Chief Fletcher," she said finally, "you've observed classified operations that officially don't exist. Are you prepared to maintain appropriate operational security regarding activities that must remain deniable?" Fletcher had spent 30 years learning when military service required absolute silence about activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Some operations existed in spaces between law and necessity, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in public reports. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything that wasn't supposed to be invisible," he replied, using the careful phrasing that indicated understanding of classification levels that exceeded normal military security. General Blackstone nodded slowly, then turned her attention back to Cassidy with the expression of someone who was about to make decisions that would affect multiple careers and possibly reshape Special Operations doctrine. "Major Wainwright, you're hereby transferred to Pentagon Special Activities with immediate effect. Your cover as custodial personnel is terminated, but your operational status remains classified. You'll be briefed on new assignment parameters within 48 hours. The decision represented a compromise between operational security and military effectiveness that acknowledged the reality of modern warfare while maintaining plausible deniability about capabilities that couldn't be officially discussed. But it also meant that Cassidy's days as an invisible operator were ending. She would continue to serve, but her service would take forms that required acknowledgement rather than anonymity. Colonel Ironside began securing equipment that would be transported to facilities that didn't appear on any public map, while his team initiated procedures designed to eliminate evidence of operations that officially hadn't occurred. But even as they worked to restore operational security, events were unfolding in other parts of Fort Blackhawk that would make concealment impossible. The mess hall that had witnessed Major Grimm's humiliation of the blue-haired janitor was now filled with personnel who were beginning to understand that they had participated in something far more significant than routine entertainment. Social media feeds that had originally carried mockery and derision were being flooded with comments from military personnel who recognized tactical indicators that suggested professional capabilities hidden beneath custodial camouflage. "Holy cow," Private Sterling Hawthorne muttered as he scrolled through responses to his live stream. "People are saying she was some kind of special operations. Look at this comment. Guy claims she had sniper's calluses." The viral momentum that had originally worked against Cassidy was now generating curiosity that threatened to expose classified programs through crowdsourced analysis. Military social media communities were dissecting every frame of video, identifying equipment anomalies and behavioral patterns that suggested capabilities far beyond civilian employment. Major Thaddeus Grimm's office had become the center of an investigation that was growing beyond his ability to control or understand. Phone calls from Pentagon officials who refused to identify their departments, email instructions that were automatically deleted after being read, security personnel who carried authorization that superseded his command authority. His social media triumph was transforming into a career-ending catastrophe as military investigators traced the viral content back to its source. Every share, every comment, every reaction was being cataloged by intelligence analysts who were mapping the exposure of classified operations through digital networks. But the most significant developments were occurring in spaces that most base personnel never accessed. Service corridors and maintenance areas were being systematically searched by teams that carried equipment designed to detect electronic signatures and communication anomalies. They found evidence of operations that had been conducted from Fort Blackhawk for months, sophisticated communication networks that connected to global intelligence systems, equipment storage areas that contained technology beyond standard military capabilities, and documentation that painted a picture of activities far exceeding normal installation functions. The base that most personnel thought they understood was revealed as the command center for operations that existed in the classified realm between acknowledged and impossible. But even as Pentagon security teams worked to contain exposure of classified programs, another phase of the investigation was beginning. Colonel Beaumont Sterling's office had received visitors who carried authority that made full colonels defer to their judgment about matters involving national security. "Colonel Sterling," said Agent Patricia Hawthorne, whose identification card listed her as working for a Department of Defense office that didn't appear in official government directories. "We need to discuss personnel who may have observed classified activities during your security investigation." Sterling studied the woman, whose presence indicated that his base had become the subject of attention from agencies that operated beyond normal military command structures. Her credentials were authentic, but they represented authority that existed in spaces between official government and classified necessity. "Agent Hawthorne, I followed proper procedures for investigating potential security breaches," he replied carefully. "All personnel involved acted according to established protocols." "Colonel, we're not investigating procedure compliance. We're conducting damage assessment for operations that require special handling. Your cooperation will determine whether this matter can be resolved through administrative channels or requires more extensive intervention." The conversation that followed would reshape Sterling's understanding of what actually occurred on installations he thought he commanded. Military bases often served multiple functions that extended far beyond their official missions, hosting activities that couldn't be acknowledged through normal government channels. Fort Black Hawk had been selected as a command center for Project Ghostwatch, specifically because its routine military operations provided perfect cover for activities that required both sophisticated infrastructure and complete deniability. The blue-haired janitor who had been cleaning floors while monitoring global communications represented just one element of a program that connected dozens of installations across multiple continents. Operators who appeared to be civilians were actually conducting missions that protected American interests through methods that couldn't be officially sanctioned. But Cassidy's intervention to save her brother had exposed capabilities that were supposed to remain invisible, triggering investigations that could compromise operations far beyond individual missions. "Colonel," Agent Hawthorne continued, "we need complete personnel records for everyone who interacted with the individual in question. This is a matter of national security that requires immediate and total cooperation." Sterling nodded slowly, beginning to understand that his authority as base commander was limited by considerations that existed beyond normal military command. Some activities required protection through secrecy rather than oversight through official channels. But as he prepared to provide the requested information, his secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated a call from the highest levels of American military command. He answered with the crisp efficiency of someone who had learned that colonels answered phones when generals called, regardless of personal convenience or security investigations. "Colonel Sterling, Fort Black Hawk." "Colonel, this is General Marcus Thorne, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I need you to suspend all security investigations and report directly to my office at the Pentagon. You'll be briefed on matters that require the highest levels of security clearance. Transportation has been arranged." The line went dead before Sterling could respond, leaving him staring at the phone while his world shifted around assumptions he had thought were solid. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs didn't personally contact base commanders unless matters had escalated beyond normal military command structures. Agent Hawthorne was watching his face with the expression of someone who understood that Pentagon intervention meant decisions were being made at levels that transcended her authority. Some operations required attention from the absolute highest levels of American government. "Colonel," she said quietly, "it appears that your involvement in this matter has been elevated beyond field investigation. I suggest you follow the general's instructions exactly." But even as Sterling prepared for transportation to meetings that would reshape his understanding of what actually occurred on installations he thought he commanded, the most dramatic revelations were yet to come. In the mess hall where the morning's humiliation had been recorded for social media entertainment, Master Chief Fletcher was preparing to address questions that would challenge everything Fort Black Hawk personnel thought they understood about military service and national defense. The gathering was informal but significant. 200-plus Rangers who had witnessed what they thought was routine harassment of civilian personnel were now faced with evidence that suggested they had participated in something far more complex and consequential. Fletcher stood before his colleagues with the measured confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades learning when military service required absolute truth and when it demanded careful discretion about activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the dining facility with authority that came from earned respect rather than assigned rank. "This morning, many of you witnessed what you thought was appropriate correction of security violations. Tonight, you need to understand what actually occurred. The silence that followed was different from normal military attention. This was the quiet of personnel who sensed they were about to learn information that would change their understanding of what they had been serving. The individual who was subjected to harassment this morning is Major Cassidy Wainwright, Force Reconnaissance, with a service record that includes operations you'll never read about in official histories. While you were recording her humiliation for social media, she was conducting classified missions that protect American lives across multiple theaters." The implications crashed over the assembled Rangers like a rogue wave hitting an unprepared shore. Social media content they had shared as entertainment was actually documentation of harassment directed against one of America's most capable special operations personnel. But Fletcher wasn't finished. The full scope of what they had witnessed required explanation that would challenge their assumptions about military service and personal responsibility. "Furthermore," he continued, "while Major Wainwright was enduring your mockery, she was simultaneously providing precision fire support that saved 12 American Rangers from a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan. The princess you humiliated was quite literally saving American lives while you were making her the subject of viral entertainment." The silence deepened as personnel grappled with the reality of what they had participated in. Military service was built on understanding that actions had consequences, but rarely were those consequences so immediate and profound. Private Hawthorne looked at his phone screen, where his TikTok video had generated thousands of shares and hundreds of comments. What had seemed like harmless military humor was now revealed as documentation of harassment directed against someone whose service exceeded anything in his experience. "Master Chief," he said, his voice tight with implications he was only beginning to understand. "Are you saying we were making fun of someone who was saving lives while we were laughing at her?" "Private Hawthorne, I'm saying that military service requires understanding that appearances can be deceiving and that our obligations to each other extend beyond what we think we see." But the most significant revelation was yet to come. Fletcher's next words would transform understanding of not just what they had witnessed, but what it meant to serve in an organization that protected American interests through methods that couldn't always be officially acknowledged. Major Wainwright's service record includes 384 confirmed eliminations in support of American operations across 6 theaters. She has conducted missions that prevented terrorist attacks against American civilians, eliminated threats to American personnel, and gathered intelligence that has saved thousands of lives. The numbers hit the assembled personnel like physical blows. 384 confirmed eliminations meant someone who had spent years conducting operations that existed in the spaces between law and necessity, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in public reports. While you were calling her princess and recording her humiliation, Major Wainwright was operating equipment that could deliver precision fire across continents. The woman you thought was weak enough to be your entertainment was actually capable of eliminating threats you couldn't see from distances you couldn't imagine. The transformation in the dining facility was palpable. Personnel who had participated in mob mockery were now faced with the reality that they had been harassing someone whose capabilities exceeded anything in their experience or understanding. Major Grimm had entered the dining facility during Fletcher's briefing, drawn by reports of unusual activity that required his attention as senior officer present. But instead of finding routine military business, he discovered an explanation that would end his career and reshape his understanding of military service. "Master Chief Fletcher," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to controlling situations through rank and aggression, "you're discussing classified information with unauthorized personnel. This briefing ends now." But Fletcher had spent 30 years learning when military service required deference to rank and when it demanded adherence to principles that transcended normal command structures. Some truths were more important than organizational convenience. "Major Grimm," he replied, using the respectful tone that experienced NCOs employed when addressing officers about matters that exceeded their understanding. I'm conducting damage control for security breaches that occurred under your authority. The personnel in this room participated in harassment of classified operations personnel. They need to understand the implications of their actions. The confrontation that followed would be discussed in military leadership courses for years afterward, analyzed as an example of what occurred when personal authority conflicted with operational necessity. Master Chief, you're relieved of duty pending investigation of your conduct regarding classified information disclosure, Grimm declared, using the formal language of military discipline. Report to base security for processing. But before Fletcher could respond, the dining facility doors opened with the measured precision of people who carried authority that superseded normal military command structures. General Sarah Blackstone entered with an escort that included personnel whose equipment and bearings suggested capabilities far beyond standard military police. The transformation in Major Grimm's demeanor was immediate and complete. General officers didn't personally visit installations to resolve routine disciplinary matters, and their presence indicated that decisions were being made at levels far beyond his authority or understanding. Major Grimm, General Blackstone said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made field-grade officers snap to attention, regardless of personal convenience. You're hereby relieved of command, pending investigation of your conduct regarding harassment of classified operations personnel. Report to Pentagon Special Activities for processing. The words hit the assembled personnel like physical blows. Career-ending consequences were being distributed with the mechanical efficiency of people who understood that military effectiveness ultimately depended on maintaining standards that protected rather than endangered American capabilities. But General Blackstone wasn't finished. The full scope of accountability required explanation that would serve as education for personnel who needed to understand the implications of their actions. Furthermore, she continued, all personnel who participated in harassment, recording, or social media distribution of content involving Major Wainwright will report for security briefings designed to ensure that classified operations remain properly protected. The silence that followed carried weight that extended beyond immediate military consequences. Social media content that had seemed like harmless entertainment was now being treated as potential security breaches that required Pentagon attention. But the most significant moment was yet to come. General Blackstone's next words would transform understanding of not just what they had witnessed, but what it meant to serve in an organization that protected American interests through methods that couldn't always be officially acknowledged. This justice was just the beginning. Subscribe for more stories where quiet heroes prove legends are real. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying across the dining facility with authority that came from decades of making decisions where failure meant consequences far beyond personal career damage. Major Cassidy Wainwright has served with distinction in operations that have protected American lives across multiple theaters. Her cover as custodial personnel was necessary for missions that required complete operational security. The revelation transformed understanding of what military service could require. Personnel who had thought they understood the scope of their profession were now faced with evidence that some soldiers operated in realms that exceeded their experience or imagination. Major Wainwright's actions today included providing precision fire support that saved 12 American Rangers from enemy action in Afghanistan. While you were recording her humiliation for social media entertainment, she was literally saving American lives through capabilities that exist beyond standard military doctrine. But even as General Blackstone explained the classified context of what they had witnessed, another phase of the revelation was beginning. The dining facility doors opened again, this time admitting personnel whose presence would complete the transformation from routine military business to something approaching legend. Captain Remington Wainwright entered with 11 Rangers who had been extracted from Afghanistan less than 6 hours earlier. Their equipment still carried dust from operations that had tested the limits of their training and survival instincts, but their presence at Fort Blackhawk indicated that some reunions transcended normal military logistics. The visual impact was immediate and profound. 12 soldiers who should have been recovering from combat operations had instead been transported across continents to participate in revelations that would reshape understanding of what military service could require. General Blackstone, Captain Wainwright said, his voice carrying the formal courtesy that special operations personnel reserved for senior officers whose decisions affected their survival. Reaper Team requests permission to address personnel who participated in harassment of our Overwatch element. The permission was granted with a nod that indicated understanding of what was about to occur. Military justice often required education rather than simple punishment, and sometimes that education was most effective when delivered by people who had direct experience of consequences. Captain Wainwright turned to address the assembled personnel with the measured confidence of someone who had commanded soldiers in conditions where leadership meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, 6 hours ago, my team was conducting operations in Afghanistan when we were ambushed by 80-plus enemy fighters in prepared positions. We should have died in that ambush. Every tactical indicator suggested that 12 American Rangers were about to become casualties in a carefully constructed Taliban trap. The silence deepened as personnel recognized that they were hearing testimony from soldiers who had survived experiences that exceeded normal military operations. "But we didn't die," Captain Wainwright continued, "because someone was providing overwatch from impossible distances, precision fire that eliminated enemy positions before they could engage our team. Cover that allowed us to extract safely from hostile territory. Guardian Angel who saved our lives through capabilities that exist beyond standard military understanding. The implications were building toward a revelation that would complete the transformation from entertainment to education, from mockery to understanding. That guardian angel was Major Cassidy Wainwright, my sister, the woman you humiliated for social media entertainment while she was saving our lives." The impact of those words hit the assembled personnel like artillery fire, family connections that transformed abstract military service into personal sacrifice, relationships that made operational success a matter of blood rather than simple professional obligation. While you were calling her princess and recording her humiliation, Major Wainwright was violating direct orders and compromising her classified mission to provide fire support that kept us alive. She traded her career as an invisible operator to ensure that 12 American soldiers could return home safely. But the revelation wasn't complete. The full scope of what they had witnessed required explanation that would serve as permanent education about the reality of military service and personal responsibility. Cassidy Wainwright entered the dining facility with equipment that no longer concealed her identity or capabilities. The transformation was complete and staggering, from custodial uniform to tactical gear that spoke to years of operations in conditions that exceeded normal military experience. The neon blue hair was gone, replaced by the kind of professional appearance that suggested someone comfortable operating in the highest levels of American military command. The trembling hands were revealed as steady instruments capable of precision that defied conventional understanding of accuracy limitations. But the most significant change was in her bearing. The submissive posture that had made her seem vulnerable was replaced by the kind of confident competence that marked someone who had commanded respect through capability rather than rank. The silence stretched as personnel grappled with the complete inversion of their assumptions. The woman they had thought weak enough to be their entertainment was actually someone whose capabilities exceeded anything in their experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the dining facility, with authority that came from 8 years of making decisions where failure meant consequences far beyond personal career damage. "I want you to understand something about military service that extends beyond rank and official recognition. The education that followed would reshape understanding of what it meant to serve in an organization that protected American interests through methods that couldn't always be officially acknowledged. Military effectiveness ultimately depends on trust between personnel who may never understand the full scope of each other's contributions to mission success. Today, that trust was violated by assumptions about worth based on appearance rather than capability. But she wasn't speaking from anger or resentment. The tone carried the kind of professional competence that focused on education rather than retribution. "I spent 6 months conducting classified reconnaissance while operating undercover as custodial personnel. During that time, I identified and eliminated threats to American personnel that you'll never read about in official reports. My cover was necessary for operations that required complete deniability." The numbers that followed would be discussed in military leadership courses for years afterward, analyzed as examples of what military service could require when conventional operations proved inadequate for protecting American interests. 384 confirmed eliminations in support of American operations across 6 theaters. Intelligence gathering that prevented terrorist attacks against American civilians. Mission success that saved thousands of lives through methods that couldn't be officially sanctioned. The impact of those numbers hit the assembled personnel like physical blows. Someone who appeared to be civilian custodial staff was actually among the most lethal operators in American military history. But the most significant moment was yet to come. The visual revelation that would complete the transformation from routine military business to something approaching legend. During the explanation, her tactical shirt had been pulled aside by equipment adjustment, revealing markings that made Master Chief Fletcher step back in recognition. Military tattoos carried specific meaning that spoke to units, operations, and capabilities that existed beyond normal military classification. The design was instantly recognizable to anyone who had served in special operations communities. Force reconnaissance insignia, combined with specialized markings that indicated assignment to units that officially didn't exist. Death's Shadow Company, 3 lightning bolts, the number 384. But it was the reaction of General Blackstone that completed the education. Military officers who commanded Pentagon special activities didn't salute field personnel unless that recognition carried weight that transcended normal organizational hierarchy. "Major Wainwright," she said, rendering the kind of formal salute that acknowledged service beyond the call of duty. "Your actions today demonstrated the highest traditions of American military service. Force Reconnaissance is proud to claim you." The visual impact was immediate and profound. General officers didn't personally salute majors unless that recognition carried meaning that extended beyond normal military courtesy. But even as the assembled personnel grappled with the complete inversion of their assumptions, the consequences for those who had participated in harassment were being implemented with systematic precision. Major Grimm found himself facing court-martial proceedings that would examine not just his personal conduct, but the leadership failures that had created conditions where harassment could occur. Military justice required accountability that extended beyond individual actions to the command climate that enabled or discouraged professional behavior. The social media content that had seemed like harmless entertainment was now being analyzed by Pentagon security specialists who were mapping the exposure of classified programs through digital networks. Every share, every comment, every reaction was being cataloged as potential intelligence that could compromise ongoing operations. Personnel who had participated in harassment faced security briefings designed to ensure that they understood the implications of their actions. Military effectiveness ultimately depended on maintaining standards that protected rather than endangered American capabilities. But the most significant consequence was educational rather than punitive. The revelation served as permanent instruction about the reality of military service and the importance of reserving judgment about colleagues whose contributions might not be visible through normal organizational channels. 6 months later, the events at Fort Blackhawk had become the subject of classified case studies that were used to train military leadership about the importance of maintaining standards that protected rather than endangered American capabilities. The incident was analyzed in courses that examined what occurred when personal assumptions conflicted with professional responsibilities. Major Cassidy Wainwright had been assigned to Pentagon Special Activities with expanded authority that acknowledged her proven capability to conduct operations that existed beyond standard military doctrine. Her days as an invisible operator were ended, but her service continued in forms that required acknowledgement rather than anonymity. Captain Remington Wainwright had been promoted and assigned to command special operations units that conducted missions requiring the highest levels of tactical competence and operational security. The brother-sister military legacy had created new operational possibilities that combined family loyalty with professional capability. Master Chief Fletcher had been commended for demonstrating the kind of moral courage that distinguished military service at its best. His willingness to support classified operations despite personal risk had been recognized through awards that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, but carried meaning within special operations communities. Major Grimm had been court-martialed and dismissed from service with consequences that served as permanent education about leadership responsibilities in organizations where individual failures could compromise mission effectiveness. Military justice required accountability that extended beyond personal career damage to institutional protection. But the most significant legacy was educational. The Fort Blackhawk incident had become instruction about the importance of understanding that military service could require capabilities that existed beyond normal organizational recognition, and that professional respect should be based on contribution rather than appearance. The dining facility had been returned to normal operations, but the events it had witnessed continued to influence military culture in ways that would extend far beyond individual careers or organizational changes. Some lessons could only be learned through direct experience of consequences that challenged fundamental assumptions about capability and worth. In Afghanistan, the valley where 12 Rangers had nearly died in a Taliban ambush had been secured through follow-up operations that eliminated enemy networks and ensured that similar traps couldn't threaten future American missions. The success was attributed to intelligence gathering that had identified enemy capabilities before they could be fully implemented. But classified after-action reports included analysis of Guardian Angel capabilities that had provided precision fire support across continental distances. Military tactical doctrine was being quietly updated to account for weapon systems that existed beyond standard understanding of geographical limitations. The Taliban commanders who had planned the ambush had been eliminated through operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged, but had disrupted enemy networks across multiple theaters. Their replacement had been carefully monitored to ensure that American tactical advantages could be maintained without revealing the sources of intelligence that made such monitoring possible. Yet even as immediate tactical situations were resolved, larger implications continued to unfold. Foreign intelligence services had detected communications anomalies that suggested American capabilities beyond their previous understanding, triggering investigations that could reshape international military balance. The ghost had become visible, and visible capabilities attracted attention from enemies who would spend considerable resources developing countermeasures against weapon systems they hadn't known existed. But some genies couldn't be returned to their bottles. The demonstration of precision fire across continental distances had opened possibilities that would influence military planning for years to come, creating new options for protecting American personnel while simultaneously creating new vulnerabilities that required different kinds of protection. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening 6 months after the Fort Blackhawk incident, reaching Cassidy in her new Pentagon office where she was analyzing global threat assessments for operations that existed in the classified realm between acknowledged and impossible. Major Wainwright, this is General Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We have a situation in Syria that requires immediate attention. How quickly can you be operational? The mission briefing that followed would test capabilities that had been refined through 8 years of operations in conditions that exceeded normal military experience. Intelligence indicated that American personnel were being held by terrorist networks that had learned to counter conventional rescue operations through tactical innovations that neutralized traditional military advantages. But the terrorists had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that American capabilities were limited by geographical proximity and standard military resources. "Sir," Cassidy replied, "I can be operational within 12 hours. What kind of precision requirements are we discussing?" "The kind that exists beyond standard military doctrine, Major. The kind that turns impossible missions into successful extractions. The kind that reminds enemies why they should fear American capabilities even when they think they've found sanctuary." The conversation that followed would establish parameters for operations that would further expand understanding of what military service could require when conventional approaches proved inadequate for protecting American interests. But it would also demonstrate that some capabilities could only be maintained through personnel who were willing to operate in spaces between law and necessity, where success was measured through metrics that never appeared in public reports. The ghost had become a legend, but legends carried responsibilities that extended far beyond individual recognition or career advancement. They carried the weight of American hopes that some problems could be solved through precision application of force, guided by principles that transcended political convenience. As Cassidy prepared for deployment to Syria, she understood that her visibility had created opportunities that wouldn't have existed for an invisible operator. But visibility also meant accountability that extended beyond mission success to the larger question of what American military power should represent in a world where precision could be delivered across any distance. The next mission would test not just technical capabilities, but the moral framework that guided their application. Some ghosts were remembered for their kills, others were remembered for their choices about when not to pull the trigger. In Syria, American personnel were waiting for rescue that might come through methods they couldn't imagine, delivered by capabilities that existed beyond their understanding of what was possible. But in Pentagon conference rooms, decision-makers were weighing factors that included diplomatic implications, intelligence considerations, and the long-term consequences of demonstrating American capabilities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The mission would succeed or fail based on calculations that balanced individual lives against larger strategic considerations, measured through equations where success and failure were often indistinguishable. Major Cassidy "Ghost" Wainwright had learned to operate in those spaces where mathematics met mortality, where precision served purposes larger than personal recognition. Now she would discover whether Legends could carry responsibilities that exceeded even her proven capabilities. The war was just beginning, but the Ghost had already chosen her side. In the end, some angels were armed with more than prayers. They were armed with the kind of precision that reminded enemies why they should fear American capabilities, even when they thought they had found sanctuary beyond the reach of conventional military power. But the most important weapon wasn't the rifle, or the technology, or the capabilities that existed beyond standard military doctrine. The most important weapon was the promise that Americans didn't leave each other behind, even when keeping that promise required sacrificing everything to honor it. Some promises were worth the cost of visibility. Some ghosts were meant to become legends, and some legends were just getting started.